The war in Europe was entering its final, violent breath, but no one on the Allied side felt calm. Cities were falling quickly, German units were surrendering in groups, and the road ahead looked open in a way that terrified planners as much as it excited commanders. Every mile forward carried not just opportunity, but political danger. And at the center of that danger was George S. Patton, moving faster than anyone thought possible, once again ignoring expectations, once again forcing the men above him to react instead of plan. Patton's Third Army had become a machine that fed on momentum. Roads that were supposed to slow him became avenues. Rivers that were meant to stall advances were crossed before orders even arrived. German defenses collapsed not because they were weak, but because they were never allowed to set. Patton did not fight where the enemy expected. He appeared where maps still showed empty space. As the Third Army surged eastward, reports began reaching Supreme Headquarters that made staff officers uneasy. Patton's spearheads were outrunning not only German resistance, but Allied coordination. Liaison officers struggled to keep track of his forward elements. Fuel columns raced to keep up. Bridges were seized intact before demolition orders could be carried out. Entire German units surrendered simply because they believed Patton was already behind them. For Patton, the objective was simple: end the war fast, break the German army completely, reach the heart of the Reich before it could regroup or fracture into chaos. He believed speed saved lives. He believed hesitation prolonged suffering. And above all, he believed history favored the commander who acted while others debated. But in another headquarters, far from the sound of artillery, Dwight D. Eisenhower studied the same reports with a different weight on his shoulders. He was not just a general. He was the man responsible for holding an alliance together. Every mile Patton advanced carried implications that went beyond tactics. There were agreements in place, promises made to allies, lines drawn on maps that were meant to shape the post-war world. Berlin loomed over every conversation, even when it was not mentioned by name. It was more than a city. It was a symbol, a political prize, a point of collision between armies that were technically allies but ideologically worlds apart. And Patton, whether intentionally or not, was moving toward it faster than anyone expected. Eisenhower understood Patton better than most. He knew Patton's brilliance. He also knew his flaws. He knew that Patton thrived on independence, that he despised restraint, that he believed wars were won by commanders willing to seize moments without waiting for permission. And Eisenhower knew that once Patton sensed an opening, no memo or directive could slow him unless it was backed by absolute authority. As reports confirmed how close Patton's forward units were getting to key routes leading toward Berlin, Eisenhower's concern deepened. This was not simply about beating the Germans. It was about avoiding an Allied crisis. The Soviets were advancing from the east with immense force. Agreements had been made about zones of occupation. A race for Berlin, especially one initiated by an American commander acting independently, could shatter trust at the exact moment unity was needed most. Patton, meanwhile, was unimpressed by political boundaries. To him, a road was a road, a city was a city, and an enemy was an enemy. He believed the Allies were making a mistake by slowing down when victory was within reach. He believed Berlin should fall to the army that could take it, not to the one that arrived later by agreement. Officers around Patton sensed the tension. They heard rumors of messages from Eisenhower's headquarters. They saw the tightening language in orders, the emphasis on holding lines rather than advancing. Patton read between those lines easily. He knew what they meant, and he hated it. In Patton's view, stopping now would waste everything his army had achieved. The German forces in front of him were shattered. Morale was broken. Resistance was sporadic. This was the moment armies waited generations for, and yet he was being asked to slow down, to consolidate, to wait. When Eisenhower finally addressed the situation directly, his words carried more weight than any order Patton had received before. This was not a tactical discussion. This was a command decision shaped by the future of Europe. Eisenhower made it clear that the objective was no longer speed at any cost, but coordination. The war would be won not just by how fast Germany fell, but by how stable the peace would be afterward. To Eisenhower, Patton's advance was both impressive and dangerous. He admired it deeply, even as it threatened to undo months of careful diplomatic planning. He knew Patton could probably reach Berlin or at least its outskirts before other Allied forces. But Eisenhower also knew that doing so could provoke confrontation with the Soviets, confuse occupation lines, and create chaos in the final days of the war. What Eisenhower said about Patton in those moments reflected that conflict. He acknowledged Patton's unmatched aggression and skill. He praised the speed and effectiveness of the Third Army, but he also made it clear that Patton's instincts, left unchecked, could create problems no battlefield victory could solve. Patton was furious when he understood the full implication of Eisenhower's position. To him, this was politics interfering with war. He believed soldiers were being asked to die so that politicians could draw cleaner maps. He believed history would judge harshly those who hesitated when victory was within reach. Yet even Patton understood one truth. Eisenhower was the supreme commander. Orders were orders. And while Patton pushed boundaries constantly, he also knew when defiance would cross a line that could end his career and damage the army he loved. The advance slowed, not stopped but redirected. Patton's forces continued to crush remaining German resistance, clearing towns, capturing thousands of prisoners, and eliminating pockets of opposition. But the sense of an unstoppable race was gone. The finish line had been moved, not by the enemy but by command. Inside Eisenhower's headquarters, there was no celebration. There was only relief mixed with worry. Relief that a potentially explosive situation had been contained. Worry that history would question the decision forever. Eisenhower knew critics would ask why Berlin had been left to the Soviets. He knew Patton himself would never fully accept the answer. In private, Eisenhower reflected on Patton's role in the war with deep respect. He understood that without men like Patton, the Allied advance would have been slower, bloodier, and less decisive. He also understood that leadership sometimes meant telling brilliant commanders no, even when their instincts were correct in a purely military sense. Patton, for his part, never stopped believing that the war could have ended differently. He spoke openly about missed opportunities. He criticized what he saw as unnecessary caution. He believed the momentum his army generated was a force that should never have been restrained. But history shows that both men were shaped by the same burden. Eisenhower carried the weight of alliance and aftermath. Patton carried the weight of battlefield opportunity and immediate victory. Neither was wrong. They were simply fighting different wars at the same time. When Germany finally surrendered, Patton stood among ruins that told the story of total collapse. The enemy was defeated. The mission, officially, was complete. Yet the tension between what could have been and what was allowed to happen lingered in every conversation. Eisenhower later spoke of Patton with a mix of admiration and realism. He recognized Patton as one of the most effective battlefield commanders of the war. He also recognized that Patton's greatest strength was also his greatest challenge. In a war defined by coalitions, Patton embodied the uncompromising drive of a warrior who saw victory only in terms of forward movement. The moment Patton reached too far too fast was not a failure. It was a collision between two necessary visions of victory, one that demanded relentless attack and one that demanded restraint for the sake of peace. And in that collision, Eisenhower did what he believed history required of him. He reigned in the fastest army on the continent, not because it could not win, but because winning meant more than crossing the next river or capturing the next city. Patton never fully forgave that decision. Eisenhower never fully regretted it. Together, their choices shaped not just the end of the war, but the world that followed. And in the silence after the guns stopped, the question remained, not of who could have reached Berlin first, but of what kind of victory the world truly needed.